I still remember the exact weight of that photograph in my hand. It was a cold Tuesday morning in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and reminds you that winter doesn't care about your grief. The parking lot of Greater Missionary Baptist Church on Beatty's Ford Road was filled with black sedans and quiet conversations, and I had just watched them carry my wife of 39 years, Eleanor May Whitfield, through those double oak doors for the last time. My name is Thomas Earl Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed architect with my own firm on South Tryon Street. Designed 11 schools, 4 churches, and more than 200 family homes across Mecklenburg County. I built things meant to last. I believed in foundations. I believed that what you construct with honesty and patience will stand long after you are gone. I thought I knew my family the same way I knew my buildings, down to every load-bearing wall, every hidden beam. I was wrong. I was walking to my car, a 2021 Lincoln Navigator, pearl white, parked in the second row, when I saw him. A man in a dirty gray coat, unshaven, with the kind of eyes that have seen too many nights on the street. He was standing directly behind my rear bumper, not wandering, not confused, standing, deliberate, like he had been waiting. I almost walked past him. My mind was somewhere else entirely, in 39 years of Sunday mornings, in Eleanor's laugh, in the way she used to hum while she made coffee. But he spoke before I could reach the door handle. "Mr. Whitfield?" he said. I stopped. He knew my name. He reached into the inside pocket of that gray coat with a hand that trembled slightly, from cold or nerves, I couldn't tell, and he pulled out a photograph. A real photograph, printed, the kind you develop at a pharmacy. He held it out to me with both hands, almost like an offering. "He paid me to stay away today," the man said. "Paid me $200 to make sure I wasn't inside that church. But I knew your wife. She used to bring food to the shelter on Freedom Drive every third Saturday. She was good people. I couldn't just—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought you should have this." I took the photograph. It showed my son-in-law, Derek Antoine Okafor, standing outside a building I didn't immediately recognize. He was handing an envelope to a man in a suit. The timestamp on the bottom right corner read, November 14th, 6 days before Eleanor died. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after the man walked away. Long enough for the last of the funeral guests to filter out of the church. Long enough for my daughter Simone to find me standing there, still holding that photograph, with my hand pressed flat against the cold metal of my car, like I needed something solid to hold on to. "Daddy?" she said. "You okay?" I looked at her. My daughter, 37 years old, beautiful in her black dress, her eyes swollen from 3 days of crying. She had Derek's hand in hers. He was standing 2 steps behind her, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent, his face arranged in exactly the right expression of grief. He saw me looking at him, and for just a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, something moved across his face. Not sadness, not guilt, something closer to calculation. I folded the photograph and put it in my breast pocket. "I'm fine, baby," I told Simone. "Just needed a moment. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Do you believe that some people are so certain they've gotten away with something that they stop being careful? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you're watching this for the first time, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps more than you know. Now let me take you back to where this story really begins. Let's go back 8 years. Let me take you back to the September evening when Simone first brought Derek Antoine Okafor to our home for Sunday dinner. Eleanor had made her signature pot roast, chuck roast slow cooked with pearl onions and baby carrots. The recipe her mother had written on a note card that we still kept in the kitchen drawer. The house smelled like everything good. Our home on Sherwood Forest Drive in the Hidden Valley Neighborhood had been the center of our family's universe for 22 years. It was a 4-bedroom colonial I had designed myself, with a wraparound porch and a backyard that Eleanor had turned into something out of a gardening magazine. Derek arrived in a BMW 5 Series. He was 31 at the time, an investment analyst at a mid-sized financial firm in uptown Charlotte. He was tall, well-spoken, had attended North Carolina A&T for undergrad and had an MBA from Howard University. On paper, he was everything a father could want for his daughter. I shook his hand that first evening and felt the firmness of someone who had practiced that handshake. There is a difference between a confident hand and a performed hand. I had been hiring people for 30 years, I noticed. But I said nothing, because I had also learned that a first impression is just a data point, not a conclusion. Over the following months, I watched Derek carefully. Not with hostility, with the patient attention of a man who builds things and knows that the quality of materials only reveals itself under pressure and time. What I noticed: he never arrived at our home without checking his watch immediately after greeting us, as though calculating how long the obligation would require. When Eleanor would serve dinner, Derek would eat enthusiastically and compliment her cooking with words that were technically correct but somehow hollow, like someone who had studied how compliments are supposed to sound. He spoke about money constantly, not in the way of someone who is working towards something meaningful, but in the way of someone who is always tallying, always calculating whose column the number falls in. In the spring of 2019, Derek proposed to Simone at a rooftop restaurant downtown. The ring was beautiful. Simone called us that night crying with happiness. Eleanor and I sat on the porch until midnight, talking about what this new chapter would mean. Eleanor said she had a good feeling. I said I hoped she was right. I walked my daughter down the aisle at Friendship Missionary Baptist Church on a Saturday in October 2019. The reception was at the Ritz-Carlton on Trade Street. 300 guests, a 12-piece band, the jumping of the broom that brought Eleanor to tears. It was the most expensive single day of my life, and I paid for it without hesitation, because Simone had never asked me for anything she didn't deserve. Derek's contribution to the wedding cost, $0. He explained, over a dinner 2 months before the wedding, that he was heavily invested in a real estate development opportunity, and that his liquidity was temporarily committed. He said it with such practiced ease that I almost let it pass, but I am a man who has reviewed contracts for 3 decades. I recognize the language of someone managing the expectations of a creditor. I paid for the wedding. I did not make an issue of it. Now, before I tell you what I found after that funeral, let me ask you this. Have you ever looked back at a situation and realized that every warning sign was right there in front of you the whole time? That's exactly where I found myself. The signs were there. I just hadn't known what I was looking at yet. The first real alarm came in February of 2021. Eleanor was already sick by then. Not dramatically, not in the way that stops you in your tracks. It started with fatigue, then a diagnosis of early-stage congestive heart failure in March of that year. The doctors at Atrium Health were cautiously optimistic. With medication and lifestyle adjustments, they said, Eleanor could have many good years ahead. I threw myself into her care. I retired from the firm, officially, fully handing the keys to my junior partner, and I became Eleanor's person. Appointments, medications, grocery lists designed around her dietary restrictions. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this so you understand that for almost 2 years, my attention was where it needed to be. And that is exactly when Derek made his move. In February 2021, Simone came to our home alone one afternoon. Derek was traveling for work. She sat at our kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and told us, quietly, carefully, that she and Derek wanted to invest together in a private equity opportunity. A friend of Derek's was launching a fund focused on commercial real estate in the Southeast. The minimum investment was $75,000. She was asking if we could contribute. Eleanor looked at me. I looked at Eleanor. "Where is this fund registered?" I asked. Simone blinked. "Derek handles that side of things." He said it's all above board. "What's the fund manager's name?" I think it's Harrington Capital Partners, based in Delaware. I told Simone I would look into it. She left that afternoon looking slightly embarrassed, the way she always did when Derek's financial schemes met my questions. I did not know at the time that she was embarrassed because Derek had coached her on what to say, and she felt she had failed the script. I did look into it. Harrington Capital Partners had been registered as an LLC in Delaware 11 months earlier. It had no verifiable track record, no SEC registration for fund activity, and its listed manager, a Mr. Clarence Harrington, had exactly one searchable professional presence: a LinkedIn profile with a stock photo. I called Simone the next morning and told her we would not be investing. 3 weeks later, I discovered that Derek had taken $47,000 from their joint savings account and invested it anyway. When I confronted him privately, just the two of us in the driveway of his home on Ree Road, a 4-bedroom house with a mortgage that Simone's salary as a hospital administrator largely sustained, Derek looked at me with a smile that I have never forgotten. "Thomas," he said, "I appreciate your concern, but Simone and I are adults. This is our financial decision to make." "That is correct," I said. "And when it goes wrong, you'll be the one who has to look her in the eye." It won't go wrong. It went wrong. By August of 2021, Harrington Capital Partners had gone silent. The $47,000 was gone. Derek told Simone it was a market correction. She told me about it 6 months later, crying quietly on the phone while Derek was at the gym. He had never apologized. He had simply moved forward, as people do when they know they will not be held accountable. I am 64 years old. I have made mistakes. I have learned that accountability is the foundation of character. A man who cannot say, "I was wrong," is a man still under construction, and not in the good way. I started keeping a file on Derek Antoine Okafor in September of 2021. By the time Eleanor's condition worsened, in the summer of last year, I had 3 years' worth of documentation. A pattern of financial transfers from shared accounts that Simone signed off on but didn't fully understand. Derek managed their finances exclusively, telling Simone that numbers were not her strength, which was a lie, because Simone graduated summa cum laude in healthcare administration from UNC Charlotte. 2 other investment opportunities that had evaporated $18,500 into a cryptocurrency trading group and $22,000 into what was described as a luxury short-term rental portfolio that never materialized. A refinancing of the Ree Road house in January of the previous year that pulled $94,000 in equity. Simone had signed the paperwork. She thought the money was going into a retirement account. It was not. And a life insurance policy. In March of last year, Derek had convinced Simone to take out a $1.2 million term life insurance policy on Eleanor. Simone told me about it over dinner, framing it as something Derek said was standard estate planning for high-net-worth families. Eleanor was in the early stages of her final decline by then. Derek had positioned himself as the beneficiary's estate manager, a role he had quietly inserted himself into through a set of documents Simone had signed at a notary's office on a Tuesday afternoon when I was at a cardiology appointment with Eleanor. The beneficiary of that policy was listed as a family trust. The trustee of that family trust was Derek Antoine Okafor. When I saw that document, which I obtained through a very careful, very deliberate process that I will describe in a moment, I sat at my desk in the study for a long time without moving. The man my daughter had married had been building a structure around my family's finances for 8 years. Not wildly, not obviously, quietly. brick by brick, the way you build a wall around something you intend to take. Eleanor died on November 20th. The insurance claim could be filed as early as 30 days after the death certificate was issued. I had 30 days. Let me tell you something about grief that nobody warns you about. Grief is not just sadness. Grief is a full-time occupation. It fills every room of your mind, sits at the table with you at breakfast, follows you into the shower, lies down beside you at 3 in the morning when the house is completely silent and the other side of the bed is cold in a way it has never been before. Grief is relentless and consuming, and it asks everything of you. Derek knew that. He was counting on it. What he did not count on was that I had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, and that the discipline required to care for a sick woman you love with everything you have, the discipline of schedules and medications and appointments and watching someone diminish day by day while you hold yourself together for her sake, that discipline does not disappear when she is gone. It transforms. It becomes something harder, something patient, something that does not flinch. The morning after Eleanor's funeral, I woke at 5:47 a.m., made a pot of coffee, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, the brand Eleanor ordered online every month. And I had kept ordering it because I wasn't ready to stop. And I sat at my desk and opened the file I had been building for 3 years. I spread everything across the desk surface. Bank statements, notarized documents, screenshots of wire transfers, a copy of the insurance policy, the deed of trust for the Ree Roadhouse, and the photograph the man from the shelter had given me. Derek handing an envelope to a suited man outside a glass office building 6 days before Eleanor died. I needed to identify that building. I needed to identify the man in the suit. And I needed to do both before Derek filed that insurance claim. The first call I made that morning was to my attorney, Harold James Beaumont III, whose office is on East 5th Street and who has been my legal counsel for 19 years. Harold is 68 years old, a Morehouse man, Kappa Alpha Psi, the kind of lawyer who speaks slowly and precisely because he has learned that precision is power. "Thomas," he said, when I told him what I had, a long pause, "send me everything. All of it. Today. Already scanning it. The insurance policy is the most urgent issue. If he files that claim, he can't file until 30 days after the death certificate. We have time. Less time than you think," Harold said. "He may try to accelerate. And Thomas, I need you to understand something before we go further. Everything we do has to be clean, legal, documented. We cannot give him any opening to flip this narrative." "Harold," I said, "when have I ever given anyone an opening?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Send me everything." I sent him everything. The second call I made was to a private investigator named Raymond Stokes, who operates out of an office on Central Avenue and who came recommended by a former colleague at the architecture firm. Raymond is 53 years old, ex-Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, 21 years on the force before he opened his own practice. He is methodical, discreet, and exceptionally good at finding things that people believe they have hidden. I emailed Raymond the photograph. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, he called me back. "The building in the background," Raymond said, "is a co-working space on South Boulevard. Goes by the name Pinnacle Suites. They rent private offices by the month. The man receiving the envelope is registered at that location under a business called Delta Point Advisory Group, LLC. A pause. Want to hear who's listed as the registered agent for Delta Point Advisory Group? I already knew, but I let him say it. Derek Antoine Okafor. I set down my coffee mug very carefully. Delta Point Advisory Group, LLC, had been registered in North Carolina 14 months earlier. It had no public clients, no visible business operations, no website. What it did have, as Raymond discovered through a combination of public records requests and sources, I will not specify, was a bank account at a regional credit union in Gastonia with a current balance of $381,000. $381,000. That money had come from somewhere, and Raymond spent the next 4 days tracing it. It came from 4 sources. The $94,000 equity pull from the Road refinancing. The $47,000 from Harrington Capital Partners, which, it turned out, was not a failed investment. It was Derek's own entity. He had created it, taken the money, and reported it to Simone as a loss. The $18,500 from the cryptocurrency group and the $22,000 from the short-term rental portfolio were the same construction, shell entities that Derek had created and fed money into before they failed. He had stolen from his own wife systematically for 4 years, and now he was waiting on a $1.2 million insurance payout. Tell me something. If you discovered this about someone in your family, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait until every piece was in place? I want to know what you think. Leave it in the comments. Because what I decided to do next was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it required every ounce of patience I had left. I decided to wait, not forever, not passively. I waited with purpose. Harold filed an emergency petition with the Mecklenburg County Courts to contest the trustee designation on Eleanor's estate documents, arguing procedural irregularities in the notarization process, a legitimate legal challenge, because the notary who had witnessed Simone's signature on the trust documents was, as Harold discovered, not commissioned in North Carolina. Her commission had expired 14 months prior. The documents were potentially void. That bought us time on the insurance claim. Meanwhile, Raymond continued building the evidentiary picture. He identified 2 additional women, one in Raleigh, one in Greensboro, who had been in relationships with Derek before Simone, both of whom had experienced significant and unexplained financial losses during their time with him. Neither had pursued legal action because, as Raymond explained carefully, Derek had always ensured that the documentation showed voluntary transfers. He was good at what he did. He had been doing it for a long time. But here's what men like Derek always failed to account for: the people they consider beneath their notice. The man from the shelter. The man in the gray coat who knew Eleanor's name, who remembered which Saturday she came to Freedom Drive with foil trays and a smile. That man's name, I later learned, was Calvin Dupree. He was 58 years old, a former electrician who had lost his business and his home in 2018. He had known about Derek because Derek had once come to the shelter, not to volunteer, but to meet someone there privately. Calvin had seen Derek hand cash to another man and had recognized Derek from a photo Simone had once shown Eleanor, who had shown the shelter volunteers her family pictures the way proud mothers and wives do. When Derek had found Calvin outside the church on the morning of the funeral and offered him $200 to stay away from the service, Derek had made a calculation. A homeless man is invisible, interchangeable, someone you can manage with cash. What Derek could not have anticipated was that Eleanor Whitfield had treated Calvin Dupree like a human being for 4 years, had remembered his name, had asked about his daughter, had brought him a slice of sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving because she knew it was his favorite. You cannot buy loyalty like that with $200. Calvin had taken the money. He needed it, but he had also come back. He had stood in that parking lot and waited for me because Eleanor had mentioned my name to him enough times that he felt he owed her husband the truth. I went to find Calvin Dupree the week after the funeral. Raymond helped me locate him at the Freedom Drive shelter. I sat with him for 2 hours in a visiting room that smelled like institutional cleaner and burnt coffee, and I listened to everything he had seen and heard over the years. He was articulate, precise, and deeply ashamed that he had taken Derek's money at all. I almost didn't come back, Calvin said. I stood outside that church for almost an hour before I made myself walk to the parking lot. I know, I said. "And I am grateful. I and Harold take a formal sworn statement from Calvin Dupree." Notarized. Filed. 3 weeks after the funeral, Harold received a formal notice that Derek had engaged an attorney, a firm out of uptown Charlotte, one of the larger litigation practices, to contest Harold's petition and push forward the insurance claim. This was expected. What Derek did not know was that Harold had already been in contact with the North Carolina Department of Insurance's Fraud Investigation Unit, and that Ramon's full evidentiary report, 112 pages, with supporting documentation, had already been provided to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office. What Derek also did not know was that I had arranged a family meeting. Now let me bring you back to where this story began. Back to that Tuesday morning. Back to the parking lot. Because that moment, me holding that photograph, Simone standing beside me, Derek 2 steps behind her with that calculation behind his eyes, that moment was not the ending. That was the beginning of the ending. And I need you to understand what happened between that parking lot and the living room of my home on Sherwood Forest Drive 11 days later, because that is where everything finally came into the light. I had invited Simone for dinner on a Thursday evening. I told her I wanted to go through some of Eleanor's personal items together, decide what to keep and what to donate. It was true, we did need to do that, but it was not the only reason. Derek came with her. Of course he did. He was not the type of man who allowed his wife to visit her grieving father alone. Harold was already at the house when they arrived. Raymond was parked 1 block away, and sitting at my dining room table, the same table where Eleanor had served 39 years of Sunday dinners, was Agent Patricia Holloway of the North Carolina Department of Insurance and Detective Marcus Webb of the CMPD Financial Crimes Unit. Derek walked through my front door and stopped. His eyes moved around the room, registered Harold, registered the 2 people he did not know, registered the folders on the table. And then, for the first time in 8 years, he looked at me without the smile. "Thomas," he said carefully, "what is this?" "This," I said, "is a conversation we should have had a long time ago." Simone looked at me, then at the people at the table, then back at me. "Daddy, what's going on?" I pulled out a chair. "Baby, sit down. I need to show you something." What followed was the hardest hour of my life and my daughter's life. I am not going to tell you it was satisfying in the way people imagine justice to be satisfying. There is nothing satisfying about watching your daughter understand, piece by piece, that the man she married had been systematically stealing from her family for the better part of a decade. There is nothing satisfying about the sound she made when she saw the Delta Point account statement, or when Harold explained the shell companies, or when Raymond put the photograph on the table, Derek handing cash to himself, essentially 6 days before Eleanor died. Simone did not cry, not right away. She went very still in the way that strong people go still when the ground shifts beneath them. She sat straight in her chair, her hands flat on the table, and she looked at her husband with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "The $47,000, she said quietly. "You told me that was gone." Derek said nothing. "The house equity. The insurance policy." Her voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. "You made me sign things I didn't understand on purpose. Simone, don't." She said it simply, cleanly, like closing a door. Detective Webb asked Derek to step outside with him. Derek consulted briefly with his phone, trying to reach his attorney, I assume, before Agent Holloway informed him that his counsel had already been notified of the meeting and that Derek was being asked to come to the station, voluntarily for a formal interview. She used the word voluntarily in the precise way that law enforcement uses it, which is to say that everyone in the room understood the alternative. Derek Antoine Okafor left my house that night in the company of a detective. He did not come back. Now I need you to hear me clearly. because this next part is the part that matters most. I did not destroy Derek. I want you to understand that. I am not built for destruction. I am built for construction, for foundations, for structures that serve a purpose, for things that are meant to stand. What I did was remove a load-bearing lie from a structure that was built on it. When the lie was gone, the structure Derek had built, the illusion of success, the controlled narrative, the carefully managed image, collapsed under its own weight. That was not my doing. That was physics. That was consequence. Derek was formally charged 6 weeks later with wire fraud, financial exploitation, and 2 counts of fraudulent conveyance. His attorney negotiated. The process is ongoing. I will not speak to the specifics of what he faces, because that is not my story to tell. That belongs to the court system now, to the women in Raleigh and Greensboro, who also came forward once the case became visible. The insurance claim was never filed. The Delta Point account was frozen as part of the investigation. Harold is working with a forensic accountant to trace and recover as much of Simon's money as possible. It will take time. Not all of it will come back, but enough will. Enough to matter. Simone stayed with me for 3 weeks after that evening. She slept in her old room, the one with the window seat where she used to do her homework, where Eleanor had painted the walls a deep sage green because that was Simone's favorite color when she was 12 years old. We did not talk about Derek much. What we talked about was Eleanor. We went through her things, the way I had said we would. Her reading glasses in the nightstand drawer. Her gardening gloves, still with soil on the fingers. The note card with the pot roast recipe, worn at the edges from 30 years of handling. I gave that to Simone. She held it for a long time without saying anything. One evening, we sat on the wraparound porch, the same porch where Eleanor and I had talked until midnight after Simone's engagement, and Simone said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Mama knew," she said. "Didn't she?" I didn't answer immediately. "She never said anything to me," Simone continued. "But the last week, when she was still lucid, she kept telling me to hold on to what was mine, to know my own value." I thought she was just talking about grief, about how to handle losing her. She paused. She was talking about him. I thought about Eleanor bringing food to the shelter every 3rd Saturday. I thought about her asking Calvin Dupree about his daughter. I thought about 39 years of a woman who understood that dignity was not something you performed. It was something you practiced, quietly, consistently, when nobody was watching. "Your mother was the smartest person I have ever known," I said. Simone leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was 7 years old. We sat there until the streetlights came on. I am telling you this story not because I want credit for what I did. I did what any father would do, what any person of conscience would do, when the people they love are being harmed. I am telling you this story because of Calvin Dupree, because of the man in the gray coat who stood in a church parking lot and decided that the memory of a woman who had treated him with dignity was worth more than the $200 he had been paid to disappear. I went back to the Freedom Drive shelter the month after Derek's charges were filed. I brought Calvin Dupree a meal, not foil trays, but a full sit-down dinner from a restaurant on Brookshire Freeway that he had mentioned Eleanor used to talk about. We ate together and we talked about her, and I told him what she meant to us, and he told me what she had meant to him. Before I left, I handed him an envelope. He looked at it. "What's this?" "A start," I said. "Eleanor would have wanted you to have it." He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter of introduction to a master electrician I know on the east side, who was looking for an experienced hand, and a check for $3,500, enough for first and last month's rent at the transitional housing program on Sugar Creek Road that a friend of mine helps run. Calvin Dupree looked at that envelope for a long time. "She always said you were a good man," he finally said. "She was the good one," I told him. I was just paying attention. I have been in this study for a long time tonight, telling you this story. The house is quiet the way it has been quiet every night for 3 months now. The Ethiopian coffee has gone cold. Outside on Sherwood Forest Drive, the streetlights are on, and the Bradford pear trees Eleanor planted along the front walk are starting to show the first small buds of a new season. Here is what I know at 64 years old, after 39 years of marriage and 31 years of building things meant to last. Character is a structure. You build it over time, one decision at a time, and it either holds or it doesn't when the weight comes down. Derek built his life on surfaces, on appearances, on manipulation, on the assumption that the people around him were too distracted by love and grief to see clearly. He was almost right, almost. Eleanor used to say that the truth doesn't need your help to come out. It just needs your patience. She said that patience is the most underrated form of strength, that anyone can react, but only the disciplined can wait for the right moment. She was right. She was always right. I miss her every single day. But I sleep soundly. I sleep the way a man sleeps when he has done what needed to be done, when the foundation is solid, when the structure is built on something real. If this story reached you, if it reminded you to pay attention to the people around you, to protect the ones you love, to understand that patience and dignity are not weaknesses, but the most powerful tools a person can carry, then I am grateful you stayed with me tonight. This one was for Eleanor May Whitfield, and for Calvin Dupree, who came back. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the truth always finds its way out. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and I will see you in the next story.